Okay, let's read an excerpt from The Highest Tide. The narrator's summer job is collecting marine specimens in Puget Sound, Washington. In this excerpt, he is looking for specimens in the mudflats before daybreak. Mudflats, or flats, are coastal landforms created when sediment and silt from the tides are deposited as the tides recede. So this is a literary excerpt. I'm probably going to read this a little more closely than I would, say, a nonfiction. Paragraph 1. I rounded the oyster beds to the far side. It was low tide by then, and I saw the water hesitating at its apex, neither leaving nor returning, patiently waiting for the gravitational gears to shift. Dozens of anxious clams started squirting in unison like they did whenever vibrating grains of sand warned that predators were approaching. I stopped and waited with them to actually see the moment when the tide started returning to its invisible buffet of plankton for the clams, oysters, mussels, and filter feeders. It was right then, ankle deep in the sound, feet numbing, eyes relaxed, that I saw the nudibranch. In all my time on the flats, I'd never seen one before. I'd read about them, sure. I'd handled them at aquariums, but never in the wild. And I'd never seen a photo of one this stunning. It was just 3 inches long, but with dozens of fluorescent orange-tipped horn-like plumes jutting from the back of its see-through body that appeared to be lit from within. Nudibranches are often called the butterflies of the sea, but even that understates their dazzle. Almost everything else in the northern Pacific is dressed to blend with pale surroundings. Nudibranches don't bother, in part because they taste so lousy. They don't even need to camouflage to survive. But I also decided right then, because their beauty is so startling, it earns them a free pass, the same way everyday life breaks for peacocks, parade floats, etc. So up until this point, we're introduced to him entering the oyster beds, the mud flats. It's before the sunrise. The tide's right between coming in and going out. And he finds what is a butterfly of the sea, a nudibranch. Apparently this colorful, luminescent, teeny little organism in the Pacific. Okay, let's keep going. The dark mud flats loomed like wet, flattened dunes stretching deep into Skookumchuck Bay in front of our house. From a distance, they looked too barren to support sea life, but up close, they still did, unless you knew where to find the hardy clams, worms, and tiny creatures that flourish in mud. I'm not sure why I decided to take a look. It was still about an hour before sunrise, and I knew exactly what the bars looked like in the moonlight, but for some reason, I couldn't resist. I heard it long before I saw it. It was an exhale, a release of sorts, and I instantly wondered if a whale was stranded again. We had a young mink stuck out there 2 summers ago, and it made similar noises until the tide rose, high enough for the rescuers to help it free. I looked for a hulking silhouette, but couldn't find one. I waited, but there were no more sounds. Still, I went toward what I thought I'd heard, avoid stepping into the mud until I had to. I knew the flats well enough to know I could get stuck just about anywhere. The general rule was you didn't venture out past the shells and gravel with an incoming tide. I sank up to my knees twice, and numbing water filled my boots. So now we've got sort of a building action. He actually heard something on the flats, right? He was curious. He couldn't resist in the moonlight to go out. And was it a whale? We don't know. 6. I kept stepping toward the one sound I'd heard, a growing part of me hoping I'd find nothing at all. When I stopped to rest and yank up my socks, my headlamp crossed it. My first thought? A giant octopus. Puget Sound has some of the biggest octopi in the world. They often balloon to 100 pounds. Even the great Jacques Cousteau himself came to study them. But when I saw the long tubular shape of its body and the tangle of tentacles below it, I knew it was more than an octopus. I came closer, within 50 feet, close enough to see its largely cylindrical siphon quiver. I couldn't tell if it was making any sounds at that point because it was impossible to hear than anything over the blood in my ears. The creature's body came to a triangular point above narrow fins that lay flat in the mud like wings, but it was hard to be sure exactly where it all began or ended, or how long its tentacles truly were, because I was afraid to pry my eyes off its jumble of arms for more than half a second. I didn't know whether I was within reach, and its arms were as big as my ankle, and lined with a sucker size of $50. If they even twitched, I would have run. So I was looking at it and not looking at it, while my heart spangled with vision. I saw fragments, pieces, and I tried to fuse them in my mind, but couldn't be certain of the whole. I knew what it had to be, but I wouldn't allow myself to even think the two words. Then I gradually realized the dark, shiny disc in the middle of the rubbery mass was too perfectly rounded to be mud or a reflection. It was too late to smother my scream. Its eye was the size of a hubcap. Okay, so what are our takeaways from this story? Well, first, it's a narrative, a first-person narrative told by the author. He's somebody who lives out by the mudflats, I guess, near the ocean in Washington, and he was out exploring the oyster beds or these mudflats in the very first paragraph. So they're introducing us to the actual scenery there, and he comes across in the first 3 paragraphs a nudibranch, which is something he had never seen. So it was a really cool discovery. The action kind of built a little bit right from there in the beginning. And then by paragraph 4, he was continuing through the mudflats, and he kept looking. That for some reason wasn't enough, and he didn't really explain that he knew why. He said he wasn't sure. But then he heard something even differently. He heard what he thought could have been a whale, and then he kind of didn't hear it again. So he kept going out there, but carefully, because apparently the mudflats were dangerous, according to paragraph 6. And he kept going in paragraph 5, and he kept going in paragraph 6. He was a little scared, obviously, because of that, maybe because of the sound, maybe because there's danger going out there. So he kind of hoped he wouldn't find it, but he did keep going. And he explained, as he got closer, well, the Washington area, I guess, has some of the biggest octopi in the world, right? So maybe it was an octopus. And then he saw a long tubular shape of the body. So he started seeing parts of it, right? Was it an octopus? We don't know. He kept going in paragraph 8 with more descriptions as he saw it, the triangular point above the narrow fins. And then he started seeing different pieces, like suckers the size of $50 and fragments in different parts of the vision, not everything at once. In fact, as this action, he's getting closer and closer and seeing different fragments and visions, the action's building. Is he going to get in trouble? Is this an octopus? What exactly is it? He got so close, it was too late to smother my scream, so he screamed at the end, and he saw the eye the size of a hubcap, so it was big. What do we think? It was 2 words. I think a giant squid. What do you guys think? But interesting how the last 3 paragraphs build up as he gets closer and closer to the climax, and they actually never tell us, but I'm going to go with that. You guys can tell me if you think differently.